Today in the courtroom was absolutely not what I was expecting. Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm talking, of course, about the Delphi murders trial of Richard Allen. He's accused of double homicide, a 13-year-old Abby and Abby Williams and a 14-year-old Libby German. A brutal murder. Their necks were cut. They were left alone in the woods. And he is accused of having done it all by himself. And we heard today dramatic confessions to a wife and a mother, but were they anywhere near as strong as what the state represented? We had huge drama over a video, brand new, nobody's seen it yet, of Richard Allen taken sometime in the last 3 weeks in the Cass County Jail. The state wanted it in, the defense wanted it out. How did the judge rule? The state rested. We now have the defense up on its presenting the defense side of the case, and they've started, but was it really all that helpful? The first witnesses they put up, and how on earth is this going to end? We are going to cover all of that tonight. It's a very big night. I want to say a special shout out to the first 5 in the chat: Lee T, Kimberly, Tony, Minanya, and Giggle Girl Editing. And hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. It is Halloween, so happy Halloween, everybody. I hope you all have little trick-or-treaters coming by, people in really cute outfits. They were doing a trunk or treat in the square there in Delphi. I would have loved to have seen that, but I also wanted to talk to you, especially after what happened today, because it was absolutely a wild day. Lots going on. So let's dive in straight away. The state was up and, of course, finished its presentation in case today. And the first witness talked about, am I missing a page? No, I'm not missing a page. All right, where were we? They were just moving to admit things. They were moving to admit various things, affidavit and things like that, doing some cleanup about things. So the 7 phone calls were talked about, a series of phone calls this was all with the witness named Harshman. He had actually listened, he said, to 700 phone calls by Richard Allen, hundreds and hundreds of hours, he said. He talked about 7 phone calls in particular that he wanted to present. There was a lot of confusion. They started to show the wrong one once. They got it all together. They finally showed these 7. These were, we started off with a big objection from the defense saying, well, what you're showing to the jury is 2 out of 3 in a series of phone calls. So Richard Allen was said to be confessing, but they were saying, the defense was that they were, let me plug this in. Okay. I don't want to run out of power while we're up. It's still not plugged in. Okay, so that they were only offering 2 out of 3. So people would be left with a misimpression because they wouldn't see that third one. And the judge agreed with the prosecution on that and said, I'm going to let them present just 2 of the 3 because they're presenting the entire phone call. I'm not going to force them to present another phone call, even if it was within just a few hours, to the same people, and is what precipitated this one. So that's somewhat controversial, and we can get into that a little bit later, but I want to keep moving. So the defense, well, I'll go ahead and I'll sort of give you a short, brief explanation. So the defense was saying, look, there's a rule of completeness, which is where if you put a little bit in, you really ought to finish it up. You shouldn't put just a little bit in and it ends up being misleading. And the state said, well, we're putting in the whole phone call. So we are doing it all. We're not being misleading. But the defense took out the rule, actually read the rule, and the rule states not just that you're looking at that one item, but that you're looking at things around it as well. And that's what the defense argued should happen here, that the judge should look at the entire context. This was a series of 3 phone calls where they kept calling each other. Richard Allen was in prison. These are all related to confessions. So, but in any event, the judge ruled that they would be allowed to present just those 2. There was quite the dramatic moment later when Rosie put the information in anyway, and the judge called a sidebar and would have liked to have been a fly on the wall at that one. We will get to that. So Brian Harshman, Indiana State Police Master Trooper, was up. And, I've been telling you, first of all, how difficult it is to hear in that courtroom. At one point, I'll tell you how bad it is. At one point, the prosecutor said, "I can't hear. Can you speak up?" And the prosecutor sitting right up there, right nowhere near where we are. Well, the prosecutor actually stated to the witness today, and this is not a one-off. This has happened over and over again. But he said, Brian Harshman sits down and starts to pull the microphone, and he's like, "Don't pull the microphone closer to you." Why? Why? And they often tell the witnesses, now that microphone is just for the people in the back, as if we don't matter. And so for us here up in the front, you really have to speak loudly. So just yell. And I've told you the judge actually had one move the microphone away. So it's, in any event, that is something that we're continually battling against, is how difficult it is to hear, and that the witnesses have a microphone. The microphone works great. When and if they speak into the microphone, it's easy to hear in the back, but they're actually getting instructions not to. It's really just mystifying. So the witness, and I'm going to go through, I was writing like furiously. I saw the bets. Remind me at the end, and I'll tell you how many pages I had today. But I was writing furiously on this because I really wanted to get the back and forth. And in a phone conversation, that can be pretty quick. So they started out with November 22nd, 2022. This was right after Richard Allen was arrested, or shortly after. So there were transcripts that they handed out, but they gave those only to the jury. So the jury was allowed to have a transcript to read along with the audio, which is really a pretty good idea and would help a lot as long as everybody can agree on what was said. But we didn't get that. So we were stuck with audio only. It was clear because being played as audio, went straight into the microphones and the speakers around the courtroom. So, and by the way, they handed out the transcript and then collected it back, which I thought was interesting, but they were allowed to read along as it was done. And it stated, just like every prison phone call in the world, that, it was subject to monitoring and recording. So on that first phone call, it was really interesting how Richard Allen sounded, because we had seen him in those interviews just about a week before this. And he sounded confident, ordinary, as if he were just an equal with the people he was interviewing with. It was really a normal conversation, how you would expect somebody typically to act. Now, this particular conversation, about a week later, he still sounds pretty normal to me. He sounds agitated, like he's very anxious, like he's stressed, he's crying some, and maybe very upset, frantic, but normal compared to what we hear later. Like if you with a normal mental status were to be upset and anxious, then that's how you would sound. The calls we heard later, really different guy. Does not sound like the same guy at all. So here's kind of how it went. This is the big call that we were told. He says to his wife, if you get to a point, it just becomes too much for you, just call the investigators to come and get me, and I'll tell them whatever they want, say whatever they want me to. I love you too much. And he's crying as he says this to his wife on the phone. She says, I wish I could hug you. He said, I don't want you to worry about me. I'm worried about you. A little bit I missed. And then he said, nobody loves me anymore. And there was kind of ragged breathing. And his wife said, oh. And he said, I know what you told me, and I believe you, which I think would be that she had said she loved him. She's crying. And we had, again, stereo crying because we're watching Kathy Allen, the wife, on the videotape, or we're hearing, sorry, not watching, hearing her on the audio tape and hearing her cry. And then I'm watching her right there in the courtroom just ahead of me, and she is crying. She cried the entire time, just about throughout all these confessions and all these conversations. It was very emotional. And a number of the jurors were looking at her particularly some of the men seated there. There are several men right on the end who were turned and watching her as she was very emotional about all of this. So then Richard Allen said, I can't give you the help you need. I can't hug you. I'm sorry, baby. It's just one more nightmare I've effed up for you. I wish I could see you. And she's crying. If anything happens, I will see you in the next life. I love you all. I love you all day long. I think that last was Kathy, although I didn't write down which one said that. All right. That was November. Fairly normal mental status, at least it seemed like to me. Fast forward to April. Completely different mental status. And when I am able to put the timeline together, you're going to see how this dovetails with exactly what the defense put in yesterday, or what they asked about, where he just deteriorated mentally and this is in the frame where he's eating feces and putting it all over himself, putting it on the walls. He's refusing to eat. And no wonder if he's eating feces. He's drinking toilet water. So things like that. There's just a dramatic mental deterioration. So this is actually on April 2nd, and it was a call to his mother, whose name is Janice. And he calls her and she laughs and says, it's good to hear from you. And he said, I'm trying to get hold of Kathy. I thought, just like a kid, they call you up and they're like, hey, I'm trying to get hold of somebody else. That's why I called you. Thank you. So glad that you checked on me. But I did think that was pretty funny. And at one point he says, oh my God, you've been going to church that long? Because she's telling him, I'm going to church now. I'll be going to church shortly. He said, how did I not know? He said, did Kathy tell you that I accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior? And his mother says, that's so wonderful. And he says, that you've been going to church that long makes me happy. And the mother says, makes me happy too. And that Kathy's going. And Richard Allen says, I haven't slept, and says, I'm okay now. Family loves me no matter what. And then, and they jumped around again, but we're going to, he stated to her, I didn't accept God until March 21st, 2023. And the prosecution, of course, is saying all of this sudden confession is because he had become religious. It's not because we were torturing him or he had a deteriorating mental status. These are real confessions, the state says. The thing is, these real confessions were mixed in with all this other stuff that was happening mentally for him. And so the defense is saying, no, it was a mental status. And the prosecution is saying, no, it's the fact that he had discovered God and therefore had a conscience and wanted to tell the truth. So he said, I tried. Apparently, Kathy, his wife, had given him a Bible. She said, I never would have done it, accepted God, if I hadn't started reading the Bible. I tried to tell Kathy, but I'm not sure if this is actually a Bible. And it apparently is a Bible called The Message, which is written in simpler language. And that's why she had given it to him. It was, more understandable, not say King James or something. She had to convince me I was actually reading the Bible, he said. So I'm just going to give you some highlights from each of the conversations. They went a good long while. The entire morning just about was spent hearing these conversations. And they were really emotional because both sides are crying in just about every call. Well, so as Richard Allen became sort of more robotic, then it became Kathy crying as opposed to Richard Allen himself crying. But nonetheless, so the very next day, 2022. Now, notice in that, there was nothing in that said, I did it, I confessed. The only reason that conversation is there is to say he had accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as his Savior, and he was reading the Bible, and therefore he was confessing because he had become religious, not because he was being mentally tortured and losing his mental stability. So the next day, though, we begin to get into it. This is April 3rd of 2022, and Richard Allen is again talking to his wife, Kathy. He said, I wanted to apologize to you. I did it. And she says, what? And he says, no, I did it. She's like, no, you didn't. He said, he says, what? She says, what? And he says, I killed Abby and Libby. No, you didn't. And the wife is like, no, you didn't. That's how it sounds. And he says, yes, I did. She's like, no, you didn't. And then she says, don't say that. You're not feeling well. She stops. She said, why did you say that? And he says, because maybe I did. She said, no. And he said, I think I did. She says, no. And she says, they are playing with you there. There's something wrong. They are messing with your mind. And he said, did Dad tell you I called? And says, what did I say to her? And she says, they were worried about you. There's something wrong. They've done something to you. And she's crying in stereo, in real life, and here in the audio. And she says, no, you didn't. Why are you saying this? He says, because I think I did. I don't know. I wish I knew. And she says, exactly. There's something wrong. Because she said, I don't know. That he ended with, I don't know. She said, yeah, exactly. There's something wrong. They're trying to get you to say things. He says, I wish they'd pay me or let me apologize to the families. She said, don't talk anymore. Okay. And it was, so I want us to talk about this confession just a minute, because the prosecution has built these up as very significant. And we've been told that in the media. We've been told that at the hearing, that these are very significant. But I want you to see how nuanced it is. While he states, yes, I killed Libby and Abby, he also says, because I think I did, I wish I knew, I don't know, in the same conversation. And so he really seems to be not entirely clear. He says, maybe I did. I think I did. And it's very, frankly, unclear exactly what he's saying. It isn't a crystal clear, I did it, and he never retreats from it. Within the same conversation, he's acting like and sounding like, because he did, like he's having a significant mental issue. He sounded like a different person from the person we heard in the interviews. Not the same guy. And we heard that increasingly, or at least consistently, through this period of time. It was way off. He was so different from what he had seen before. Very tentative, confused, quiet, robotic sometimes, flat. It was just very different. All right. So the next phone conversation is May 10th. Now, we'll put this together with our notes from yesterday, but I'm pretty sure he had a Haldol injection by now. So he just seemed out of it on this conversation. He was mumbling. He was barely talking, like barely kind of responding in brief sentences. So he started out, it was like he was drugged, sluggish. That's how it sounded. Are you okay? He says to her. He says, I think maybe I lost my, let's see what that's lost my wine. Why would you said that? Lost my, oh, darn it. I can't read my own writing there. Maybe I lost my, well, I'm sorry. We'll have to miss that one word. That's what she says. I'm sorry. That's what Kathy is talking about. I switched how I was going to do these. I was like, okay, I got to be consistent on this. So I've got Kathy and Rick. So she's talking to him. I think maybe I lost my something or another. She's just talking. And she says, oh, and Richard Allen says, so I can trust Brad and Amy then. Oh, this is so important. I read my word finally. Okay. Scratch all of what I said. This is Rick Allen speaking. I think maybe I lost my mind, directly causing a lot of nuance inside this conversation. And he asked his wife, so I can trust Brad and Amy then? I'm not sure who Amy is, but Brad is his attorney. And I think that's who he's talking about. And the wife says, are you sure you want to talk to me over the phone? And Richard Allen says, I think you have to. I need you to know I did this. She says, what? No, you didn't. Dear, there's no way. And he says, do you still love me? And she says, no, you have not done something. And I think you aren't well and don't need to be saying you did something you didn't. He says, I don't know what's going on. I'm definitely going to lose my mind now, though. and then says, I'm trying to be at peace with things. Again, you can see how really nuanced this is. He says, I had a dream. I need to let you go. She says, you're dreaming again. He says, I have to let you know I did it. And the wife says, no, you didn't. There's no way. So highly nuanced. He's in almost a dreamlike state. He sounds like he's in the dreamlike state. He refers to that. He says he's going to lose his mind. He says, maybe I have lost my mind. He's unclear whether he can trust anybody. And you can just see throughout the conversation, lots of nuance around this. And where it definitely sounds like it ties into what the defense had said about how he was internalizing and how he was deteriorating mentally in a significant way. So the next one is, I think, a week later, May 10th, because I think that was May 3rd. Yep. Oh, no, that was May 10th. Here's another May 10th. Okay. It's at 11:15 a.m. And Richard Allen is mumbling, speaking very slowly. He's just sort of barely responding to anything that's said to him. And he says, I need to know, and I think it says, if you still love me. And she says, yes. And she is crying hard. And he says, and everybody else will as well. And she's crying. And I don't know that I didn't write that she said anything. He said, I may have to spend the rest of my life here. She says, don't talk about it. He says, I don't understand. I just got to know that everybody's still going to love me. And he says, it's true. She says, no, it's not. He says, it's true, honey. And she says, no, it's not. And I wrote that he sounds slow. He sounds distant, sort of suppressed, mechanical, kind of zombie-like. He says, I'm well. And she says, no, you're not. He said, if I get the electric chair, and she just, no. And she's crying. She's crying right there in the chair as well. And she says, this isn't right. He said, I did it. She says, no, stop. I did it, dear. Stop. I cannot stop. I've got, and I missed a word, in me now. I killed Abby and Libby. She says, stop saying that. I was trying to let you go, Richard Allen says. She says, we're going to be back together. And she is crying hard at this point. Says, I need to know someone's going to love me no matter what. And his wife said, I do. Please stop talking. It's like, oh, man, these were very emotional. They were actually very hard to listen to, I thought. On June 5th, sorry. All right, I'm going to get hold of it. I was thinking about my husband. June 5th, another phone conversation. And this, Richard Allen sounds even worse. He just kind of moans when the conversation first began. And Kathy says, you need to get you some coffee. That sounds worse than coffee. And he said, yeah, I hate to spend that money. And she said, don't worry about that. And then he just kind of moaned again, oh, Lord. And he said, I feel like I've lost my mind. And she said, well, where you're living right now is not a good place to be. And remember, I've cut these down because they were quite long. So I'm just giving you some highlights. He said, it's a really frustrating, I think, experience right now, but that's nothing compared to where you're at. Now, trust me, where you are is way worse, way worse. She said, no. And he said, I just want you to know that I done it, right? And she says, and she suggests that he pray to himself, and that would be really helpful. What she's telling him is, you can't speak about this. You can't talk to anybody at all, including me, because our phone call conversations are recorded. So pray to yourself quietly. And maybe that's the best that can be for right now. Then June 11th, he says, I did it. Kathy, she says, what? I did it. You still there? She says, yes, dear, but you didn't do it. He said, why do you say that? And it's more curious, like, why do you say that? And she says, why do you say that? And she says, I don't want to upset you. He says, I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I've lost my mind. She says, honey, you can't call me and talk like this, okay? He says, I'm so sorry, baby. I didn't want to do this. And she's crying throughout. She cried the whole time, but she was also crying on the phone call. You're not going to do anything to yourself, are you? He asks her, and she says no. Says, I'm probably going to have to K myself now. She says, stop. I can't call you anymore. And he says, I can't tell you what's been going through my mind. And I wrote, he sounds sluggish, out of it, spaced out. And he says, I feel like I'm already in hell, followed immediately by, I'm waiting on a Bible. Maybe they have special delivery to hell. But I think what he was saying is there was a period of time when he had stuffed his Bible into the toilet. And I think it must be after this. And he's saying he's asking for another Bible. She does not say much in this conversation. She mostly just cries. And what is unbelievable about every one of these conversations, you are listening to the most intimate, emotional conversation you may have ever heard in your life. I mean, of other people. I mean, I don't know I've ever heard people in this sort of depth of communication and emotion. And it'll go click, it'll give them a warning, then go click. Thank you for using GTL in this happy computer voice. And you're like, oh my gosh. I mean, it just slams down in the middle of, scene. The curtain comes down in the middle of the act, in the middle of their dialogue. It's unbelievable. I am not sure that this was helpful for the prosecution at all. I will continue. The prosecution asked the witness, do you have a sense of his speech patterns? And then the attorney for Richard Allen objected and said, this man has no education in psych or speech patterns. He can't answer that. And the prosecution said, he watched thousands of hours of this man. So it was overruled as objections by the prosecution, by the defense usually are. And at this point, I didn't agree with that. I felt like this witness that just the fact that he's heard Richard Allen doesn't mean he can comment on speech patterns or his anything along those lines, because I don't think he had that kind of knowledge or background. But the court allowed it. And so he was saying that he used the same tone when he spoke to his wife about regular matters as he did when he was confessing. I find that to be utterly impossible to believe. If these people talk like that when they're discussing what to order from Walmart, wow, they are living on the emotional edge at all times. I find that utterly impossible. But also his demeanor, I think every juror will be comparing what he says and how he says it to who he was in the interviews that were played, and to even who he was in November during that first conversation, because this guy is completely different. This is not the same person. He is just not anywhere near as mentally there as he was. He sounds like somebody who has been in solitary confinement now for half a year, who hasn't seen anybody, has barely been removed from that, isn't allowed to talk to anybody. That's what it sounds like. And I don't know. Did it help the prosecution? So they then read through Dr. Wallace's report again. You may remember about how this was the big confession in Dr. Wallace's report, where Rick Allen for the first time gave a pretty specific explanation of what happened during the course of the murders of Libby and Abby. He said he went to his parents' house. He was supposed to go to lunch, and instead he bought a 6-pack. He drank 3, finished the rest later, bundled up, went to the trails, and then, quote, laid in wait and saw the girls, followed them on the bridge. He was doing something with a gun, and he figures that's where he thinks the bullet fell out. That's not where they found the bullet. They found the unspent cartridge between the girls' feet at the scene, which was somewhere totally different. He ordered them down the hill. He thought they were older than they were. Didn't realize how young they were. He was going to R the girls, grape, and he saw a van, which scared him and caused him not to follow through with the R that he had planned. We talked yesterday about the witness who came and said he, in fact, had a van, and he drove down that road at right about that time on his way home from work. We have a hint that the defense has some good evidence that says that's totally false. but we don't have that evidence all the way in yet. We have the questions, but we don't have all the details. Okay, so he said getting scared caused him to cross a creek, cut their necks, make sure they're dead, and leave. Said he covered their bodies with tree branches, exited by keeping off the trails, and returned to his vehicle. Now, all of that, because he had received his discovery, could have been something that he would have known. I mean, he now had photographs of the scene and the bodies. So in this fever dream state that he referred to, maybe, possibly, the defense says he just imagined this. He put himself in that scene. He's been told by everybody around that he's a murderer. And so he put himself in this dreamlike state and thought he had done that. That's more or less, I think, what the defense is arguing. But in this case, what stuck out was that van, because there wasn't a mention of the van in the discovery. At least we don't think there was. The defense will be bringing a witness to talk, at least I think, about what actually was available to Richard Allen in terms of the discovery. So let me skip a page. Yep. Okay. Just a minute. Give me just a second. They talked about interviewing. Yeah. Brad Weber. Is it? I'm getting my days mixed up. I thought Brad Weber was yesterday. It was yesterday. I know it was. Okay. So he talked about interviewing Weber and about his van that he owned and the reports that were done by law enforcement. Here we go. The reports done by law enforcement up until that point didn't mention that he drove a van. What the prosecution is doing is trying to head off the defense argument that Richard Allen knew about this van, and he added that to the story, not because he really confessed. He added that to the story because he drove, because it was real, because there really was a van. It really did startle him. It really did cause him to force the girls across the creek, to take them up the hill and to kill them. That's what the prosecution thinks happened. And they want to prove that it's real, that it wasn't just a dream. It wasn't a figment of his altered mental status. This was the real deal. He was really confessing. That's what they're trying to argue. So now throughout this, I thought of great interest, Baldwin, one of the two attorneys, had his arm around Richard Allen's chair, was kind of leaned up against him the whole time. And I believe part of what he's communicating is, I don't think he's scary. I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he's a double homicide. So he was, his body language was saying, I feel safe around him. All right, let me make sure there's nothing I left out there. Nope, I think we got it all. They played again the video of that Libby took. And honestly, we were talking about that. We're confused about that stabilized video because it seems to show more than the original video. There seems to be like a jump, and we were trying to figure it out. Does anyone know the answer to this? Because somebody in the courtroom, as we were talking afterwards, was suggesting maybe somehow they were able to access both the front and back of Libby's phone. You know how you have a camera on both sides? If the camera is activated, is there any way that law enforcement could access both sides? Is that possible? If you know the answer, put that in there. I had always assumed that whichever side you put it on, that was all that the camera saw. It was either one or the other, not both. But maybe somebody in the chat knows the answer to that. All right, so then he ran through what Weber had said. I know I really do. Oh, thank you, Michael. Happy Halloween to everybody. Irish Alexandria, the sighting of the van, the missing smoking gun. That is exactly what we're talking about. Thank you for your question, Irish Alexandria. Yes. And Mitspunky, the Halloween Treats Fund donation. That is a good idea. Thank you, Mitspunky. Liz Romano has been a member for 8 months. And thank you, Nell T. Yes, I'm going to be filming with Peter on the Lawyer You Know channel. We're going to be filming on Saturday. I'm not sure if it's going to be live or if he's filming and it'll air live at some later point. But yes, we are getting together and we're going to do a show on Saturday. So, okay, Weber clocked out Weber is the man who had the van. They went into some details about it, and I'm going to pull up our timeline because I really want to. In fact, let's just go ahead and do that. Let's add that to the stage. And thank you. Now I'm going to pull that off. Okay, so Weber clocked out at 2:02. So when I do the timeline, I will add that in right there, 2:02 up there. Now this is after Libby and Abby are at the Monon High Bridge Trail, but it is before Libby captures that 43-second video. Now, if he clocks out at 2:02, Weber cannot possibly be bridge guy. He can't get home fast enough because he said it took 20 to 25 minutes to get from his work to his home. So the law enforcement estimated his time arriving at home, which we'll add in here, was between 2:27 and 2:30. They gave it like a little range of about 4 minutes. So that puts it in right there, right around the time Libby's phone moves 68 steps. So that is possible, I suppose. The only problem with that, and then you do see right after that, Libby's phone registers 2 floors, which would be 20 feet. So conceivably, that could be Richard Allen ordering them across the creek and then up the bank on the other side where they were murdered. The 68 steps fits time-wise, and the 2 floors does, but there's never anything in here that shows him going down the embankment that they were ordered down on 213. It just seems like there's something wrong with the phone. It isn't registering what it needs to register. For them to go down as they were ordered to do and then back up is more than 2 floors. I mean, I saw the video. That's in and of itself. The going down would be 2 floors, and then up the other side would have been as well. So I don't think that matches. They also have it in this very limited time frame, 2:31 to 2:32, just in that 2-minute period. Now, the last movement of Libby's phone is 2:32. So let's think through this. What it would mean is that at 2:13, he orders them down the hill. He has them disrobe or something. The whole thing is a little bit confusing. He gets scared by the car coming home at 2:27 to 2:30. And let's say 2:27. Let's give the minute. If it's 2:30, how does Richard Allen get scared that get them across the creek, Abby dressed in Libby's clothes, up the embankment, murdered, and Abby lying on top of Libby's phone? How does all that happen in 2 minutes for the last movement of Libby's phone? That seems really tight. Even if it's 2:27, which is what he estimated, that only gives 5 minutes until the last movement of Libby's phone. So he has to be scared, force them across the creek. It's a pretty wide creek, and they get wet, and you got to figure there's some chaos around that. And then they clamber up the hill, which is pretty steep, may take all fours at a minimum, is going to be quite a little climb. And then he manages to murder them both and leave the phone, and all of that happens in like 5 minutes. That is really, really, really a tight time frame. So I imagine that the defense will be going after this timeline pretty hard, that they will be looking at whether or not that's even possible. Does that make sense? I mean, conceivably, he grabbed Libby's phone and threw it down in that area where they were found between the trees, and then killed her in that area. But she was lying down when she was murdered, they said. So I don't know. It seems awfully, awfully tight for all of that to have happened. And just the phone seems to be a block in there. Some of what happens with the movement of the phone makes sense. Some of it, not so much. And I don't know. I find it pretty hard to figure out. I think that the defense is probably going to go really hard at this timing. Now, they're fighting the van because it at least fits into Richard Allen's story. He says he saw a van. So if they can put a van there right then, it makes his story more credible, more believable, because there's a fact that they say couldn't have gotten in discovery. It's a fact he had to have known himself, and only the murderer would have known that. Now, the defense may be able to prove the van wasn't there at that time, in which case that will be a totally different issue as well. But I just wanted y'all to kind of see. Let me go ahead and pull that down. All right. So, And they focused him in on that whole issue of well, let me go ahead and say this. So he said he recognized the voice on the videotape as Richard Allen. I will tell you, there were people in the courtroom who agreed with him, who felt like the voice on the videotape was Richard Allen. I could not tell it. The voice down the hill, it just sounds so mechanical. It sounds like a robot because it's been put through a bunch of filters and altered because they were trying to clean up a very messy, chaotic video. They were trying to make it logical, make it make sense. And so the cross was, well, you received 14,000 tips, remember? And he kind of, I don't know how many. Well, okay, it was a lot, right? We already heard 14,000 from Ms. Shank, who testified about having to catalog and organize those, and said that he said, and many of those ID'd a voice. And they said, my neighbor, my friend, somebody I know I know his voice, and I've heard the bridge guy, and I'm telling you, bridge guy is this person. So he was saying, isn't that pretty standard? And he wasn't really agreeing with that. He said, well, would it surprise you to find hundreds of references where people were sure that the person they were identifying had the exact voice of bridge guy? He said, so if Brad Weber gave you an inaccurate information, your theory would be flawed. And he said, no. All right. I think I may have mixed up one thing. The hundreds of references was not related to the voice, but the hundreds of references was, have you ever seen how many references to a white van were in the discovery, apparently? He said, would it surprise you to find hundreds of references? So I want to make sure I get that cleaned up for you. Did you review a report by another agent? And the judge said no, didn't allow that in. It was sustained. They'll have to bring probably the other agent. Although the whole point of this was, if you didn't review the report by the other agent that said, where Brad Weber apparently said, I did something else before I came home, then if they don't allow, if he was saying, I haven't seen that report, or I didn't review it. If so, then what that's saying is it was an inadequate investigation, because this person had talked to Brad Weber and had information that now contradicted what was being told to the jury. But I think we'll get all of that will come in during the defense case. So he said, if one of those reports by other law enforcement suggested that Brad Weber was not there between 2:13 and 2:32, would your theory change? And he said, no. He said, if Brad Weber is not credible, would your theory change? And he said, no. So no matter what, he's sticking to that theory. He is very clear on that. They talked about, there was a handgun seized from Weber. They wanted to ask about that. Rosie did, the attorney for Richard Allen, but that was ruled out as being outside the scope. The investigation into Brad Weber and whether he was involved was outside what had been asked by the prosecutor on direct. And the way it works is, what the prosecutor asks, you can ask in that same area, but the other way around, you can't do. You can't introduce new subject matter in your cross-examination. It has to be within the scope of what was covered in the direct. I probably would have allowed it, but nonetheless, that was the purpose of the ruling. I just wanted you to know why it happened. So this was, I thought, one of the most interesting moments of the day, okay? He said, Rosie says to the witness, Harshman, law enforcement, did you consider that Weber could have been involved if you put his van there at that exact time? Did you consider that? And honestly, the witness just looked stunned, and he said, no. I mean, it was certainly occurring to me. It makes Brad Weber a suspect. If he comes rolling down the road right along at the exact time when the girls are being abducted, and they're probably still right there in the forest near the road, and all that's happening. I mean, they were right by the road when they were first abducted. They've barely had time to get down the hill and maybe a ways. And remember, they've got to take off clothes, change clothes. A lot of stuff has to happen in the course of that. And we can guess they did that on the south side of the creek where the road is that he's talking about, because of the fact that Abby's clothes were wet. So it looked like she had probably crossed the creek. And her clothes were wet up to like a line, they said, on both her sweatshirt and the shirt underneath it, as if she had walked across in water that came right up to a line. And that showed where the water had come to on her. And the question, are you aware he was a suspect? I think was the word he used. And they said that's outside of the scope and motion in limine. Did you consider, I already told you that, in the 2017 reports, he said, did you look at one by Agent Poole and Mr. I couldn't catch the name. He said, yeah, and it was the first time he'd looked at it ever. He had heard it existed, but he had never seen it. This is apparently the one that the defense wants to bring that says that Brad Weber wasn't on that road. He was somewhere else at the time. We'll just have to wait and find out exactly what all that is about. And the question then came, well, if he had Haldol on April 14th, might that impact how he sounded? In other words, his voice sounded different to Harshman than it would have maybe normally. And he said, well, he didn't, there was an objection that wasn't qualified to talk about how Haldol might affect your voice. He was qualified to say that his voice was the same as on the tape, but he wasn't qualified to talk about how medication might affect his voice. On May 18th, the Haldol, might that impact? Also sustained. Did you know he was being given mind-altering drugs? And he was talking about the tone of voice, the pace of speech, because he was trying to say, this is everything I saw of him was the same. He had this kind of same pattern of speech. I saw this over and over. He said, well, did you know he was taking mind-altering drugs? Did you check with the staff to see what he was taking, that and whether or not it could impact his pace and his timing? And he said no. So at this point, Brad Rosie said, we haven't seen that video. Would it be helpful to put it in context? Talking about, what video was that? I will have to skip that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what video there was. There was an objection that was overruled in there. We'll skip that part. This was a good question. In the history of your entire career, is it accurate that you were never assigned to surveil a man like this? And he said, yes, that's right. I was never asked to do that. All right. Oh, here's what it was. Richard Allen was locked up in solitary, but he was monitored. And Brad Rosie said, well, we haven't seen that video of him being monitored. Would that be helpful? But at that point, it did not get put into evidence. We are expecting to see actual video of Richard Allen in his cell at some point soon. We're expecting that in the defense case. So hopefully I'll be able to report on that to you pretty soon. Now, the girls on one of the things that they're trying to talk about, of course, is the reference to the van. He pinned it down. There's nothing that he said in this confession, they don't believe it is a confession, about the color or the make or the model of the van. He just said van. That's all there was. And but we do know that there was a van on one of the only, I think, 3 driveways that are on this little stretch of what isn't really a road, although it has a highway sounding name like 625 West, but it's not. It's really just a driveway for these 3 people who live down this direction. All right. He also argued that some of the things that were said in this confession really couldn't have been right. For example, for him to say he was lying in wait doesn't really make sense because you see him come up behind the girls. And the witness said, well, maybe he was lying in wait and that he was waiting for them to pass and then he followed them. But that was a little different. Also, the fact that he thought his bullet came out on the bridge, we know that wasn't true. Or we know the one they found was between the girls. They didn't find one on the bridge or under the bridge, but of course it could have gone in the water. It might have been missing. Then there was this question. Have you been listening to his phone calls in the last 3 weeks? And would that be stressful? I'm going to tell you 3 things that are really important here in a row. and then I'll point them out. There'll be some stuff in the middle. This is number one. This is the defense asking the witness, have you been listening to phone calls of his in the last 3 weeks? And would this be a really stressful time coming into trial? And he said, yes. I think their point was he's not confessing now. He's under stress, but he's no longer in complete mental breakdown. And the reason he confessed back then was because he was in mental breakdown. Now he's not. So that's why he's not confessing, even though it's a very stressful period of time. And so he said, have there been times where he's proclaimed his innocence? And he said he has some, but we heard a lot of them over and over. For example, when in those interviews, have you ever seen him this is the second thing to remember and circle in your mind, and I'm going to tell you why. Have you ever seen him pose a threat to anyone at Westville? And he said, well, he passively disregarded directions, and so they tased him to get him to take his hands out of the slot where meals are passed through, and he spit on someone. They said, have you seen video of him eating feces? He said, well, possibly, but the video was really poor. I can't dispute it, but I can't see it. And that he constantly needs attention. He's trying to get attention. That's been a theme throughout the section the prosecution offered on his mental health status, is that this was really just fake attention seeking. That's what it was all about. He sent him phone calls that he does things for attention. We heard one comment kind of like that. We didn't hear a phone call like that, though. We saw one thing written down like that. That there was self-harming that was happening in Westville when he was in the prison there. He was banging on his head and things like that. And the witness said, yeah, that's because people weren't coming to talk to him, as if he were more a manipulation than it was a mental response. Did you watch him roll around in feces? Yes. I never thought I needed, and you never thought you needed to talk to medical staff about that? And he said, no. And in fact, you said he was right where he needed to be. And he said, yes. They then did another phone call. This was a phone call where they had gone through they were supposed to go through 7, but they only got 6 of them. And there was one, they had teed up the wrong one. So they had to offer another one, they had to bring it back, and they brought it in here and said, okay, you told Kathy if it became too much for you to just let me know, I'll tell them everything they want to know. That was what he had said on direct examination. I'll tell them everything they want to know. But here's what Richard Allen actually said. He said, I'll tell them whatever it is they want me to say. I'll just say it. Now, there was an objection here that was sustained that he shouldn't have to answer this because the jury had just seen it. His point was that this was really about protecting Richard Allen's wife. This was not about, I'll tell them the truth. This was about, I will tell them whatever you want me to. This July 31st period is, of course, important because it's after some of the worst of the mental status. It wasn't over, but it's somewhat after that. And then I'm still not to the next phone call. Hold that. So on April 3rd at 5:14, there's a phone call that he references a call he made earlier to his dad. And Brad Rosie, remember, had tried to get the judge to say, for completeness, you have to present all 3 of this trilogy of phone calls. You can't do 2 out of the 3 because the jury is going to be confused. The judge refused, sustained that objection. And so he tried to get it in through the witness saying, well, would these phone calls provide context for you? Because then maybe they would let him play it. But the witness, it was sustained again, another objection. So he never did get that in. The problem for them, and here's what the issue is. The judge said, well, you can get that in your case. And that's what the prosecution said. But how? Because Richard Allen would have to testify to get that into evidence and say, yes, that's my phone call. Right now, it's being introduced as against Richard Allen's interests by the prosecution. They're allowed to do that. It's against a party's interests. But Richard Allen wants to introduce it to bolster his own case. He can't do that. He can't just bring in stuff he said before and say, why, look, I told 40 priests that I was completely innocent, and have them all come in and say, oh, yes, he told me that. That would not be, obviously, that would be very unfair because you could just tell people that and have them come in and testify for you. Instead, he would have to actually come in and say, okay, I actually said that. So Richard Allen proclaimed his innocence in that 312. Oh, this is where Rosie really got into it here. So he is frustrated at not being able to get that other phone call in. And as I said earlier, I think it should have come in. I think if they spoke close in time and they were referring back and forth to the phone calls, absolutely they should have been. You know, when I said earlier, blah, blah, yeah, they all should have three been in. To me, I think that that's how it should have been. I don't think the judge was, I don't think it's reversible error probably, but I do disagree with it. So here was the question. Richard Allen proclaimed his innocence in that 3:12 a.m. phone call. Objection. Said he was broken down. Objection. Felt like he was in Guantanamo Bay. Objection, the judge. Sidebar. and so there was a sidebar. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall during that one, but of course we couldn't hear it. They were off to the side, and the judge was, I am sure, upset because what he had done was kind of squeeze in under the line what she wasn't allowing him to get in, which is the context of what happened in that other phone call. The jury knows it's not in evidence, but at the same time, they've heard it. They've heard it. And that's what I think that should have been in. The fact that within a matter of like minutes to an hour of the time he was saying these confessions, he was saying, I'm broken down. I feel like I'm in Guantanamo Bay and I'm innocent. And he said that before he said I'm guilty. That to me, that's pretty important. That's real important context because it says something about what he's actually thinking and feeling, which is completely broken down and mentally no longer competent. So the judge, approach, please, is what I wrote down. She was not happy, and I'm sure they were all unhappy about that. Rosie also attacked this as being something that was pretty generic. Like a lot of the comments were like, I killed them. It wasn't like I killed them using such and such, and I did this and that. It wasn't all that specific. So let's see. There was the final question. Rosie said, so it's one fact that you say he knew that no one else would know. And he said, so just one fact, and the witness finished that no one else knew. And right there, that's where the two join on this issue. That's where the defense says, look, come on, he's clearly in mental instability. There's no way you can use these confessions against him. And then the prosecution saying, yeah, but there's this fact, the van, he knew the van, and that should have been enough to show us that he's the real killer, that he couldn't have known it otherwise. So we will see how this continues to play out. Okay, so, all right, whoa, this was heavy. Beautiful, beautiful phone call with his mother. I mean, oh my gosh. So Richard Allen, this is May 17th. So he's still in the psychosis. He was diagnosed. And did Kathy tell you that I did it? And his mother says, we're not going to discuss it, okay? She says, we love you. You know that. And he says, regardless? And she says, yes. And Kathy's okay, he asks. She says, Kathy's okay. She says, we've been holding each other up. And Richard Allen says, I'm afraid you won't love me because of the fact I said I did it. And his mother says, you're not in a good place right now, and we will always love you no matter what. She says, just saying it doesn't mean you did it. And Richard Allen says, it does if you did it. She says, don't talk like this. I think they're just messing with you. And he says, no, Mom, they're not. I did it. She says, I just know you didn't. I just know you don't have it in you to do something like that. And he says, I wouldn't tell you I did it if I didn't. And she says, if they're messing with your head, and all around us we were trying to, if they're messing with your meds, if they're messing with your head, I thought meds, but it was confusing. If they're messing with your meds like that, yeah, you would. But we're not going to discuss it anymore. And Richard Allen says, if I did do it, would you not love me anymore? And she says, I will always love you no matter what. There's nothing that would ever make me stop loving you. And then they get off into other conversations. I just thought, God, let me be that mother. Like, wow. And that is why I am not sure that these confessions help the state. these particular ones. They were so emotional, and you could so clearly see that his wife and his mother had great faith in him, and that what strong relationships they had, unbroken by anything that has happened in all of this time, that just unbroken relationship. And that speaks really highly of Richard Allen, as well as of the people who he's chosen. These people, he's surrounded himself with, a good relationship with his mother, and also he's married his wife and stayed with her. And so that, to me, speaks to character. And so I don't know what the jury will do with that. At the same time, I mean, look at some of the things she's saying. It does if you did it. He says, just saying it doesn't mean you did it. And he says, it does if you did it. Like, wow, no, Mom, they're not. I did it. I wouldn't tell you I did it if I didn't. Ironic, because he said over and over, I'm not going to confess to something I didn't do. So I can see why the state put it in. I don't know. I would really like to know what y'all think, because I've read them to you now. That's about the best we can do until the tapes get released at some point. So let me know in the chat. What are you thinking? How did it affect you? What did you think about his relationship? Do you think these were very serious? Are they a problem for the state? Do you think that the evidence around his mental status was enough to convince you that these aren't real confessions? I would really like to know that. And we will beef up the timeline, and I'll put right next to each other, here's what he was doing. Here's when he confessed. Here's what he told the counselor. Here's when he confessed. So I'll try to get those lined up so we can really see that progression, because it's that important. It is every bit that important. All right, let me thank a few people. Amanda Thee has gifted a Lawyerly membership. Thank you. And we are having a members live event. I've been trying to figure out exactly when we are going to do that. I will probably do it Saturday night after the live stream. I haven't totally decided. I have a lot going on, and so I was trying to figure out when I could do it and enjoy spending some time with y'all. So, do the people of Delphi think Richard Allen is guilty? I would say they're probably mixed, but I think they're willing to accept that there's a lot of question here, and I think they want very, very much to know the truth. That's what's come across to me, and people talking to me, is they don't know and they want to know, and they want the right person to be convicted. Gotta plug in the computer real quick. All right, give me just a second. We can't have it going dead on us. That would not do. We've had enough trouble with stuff like that, huh? I for sure don't want that to happen. All right, I'm trying to figure out. I've got a lot of cords here. All right, here we go. I don't know what I just unplugged. Hopefully it was nothing too important. We'll see. If anything goes wrong, now we'll see. I think that was my phone. I'm okay with that. Okay, so hopefully that didn't change anything, and we're still good, and you can see me. Hopefully we'll turn that a little bit, or maybe I should scoot over more in the middle. Okay, so I will tell you, it was quite the morning, and trust me, the day was nowhere done by now. Nowhere near done. There was a lot left that happened. So here is what happened next. So, and may I say, in that last phone call, he sounded better than he had in the other phone calls, like resigned, but better than he had in the other phone calls. That was the May one. So next, the question came, there were issues at Cass County where he had to be restrained and was violent. And sidebar, jury out, etc. There was all kinds of discussion about this. So I want to go back. Remember those points I told you. Okay, we got to remember these points. I forgot to even mention the third. Okay. Point number one was the question, you've been listening to his phone calls in the last 3 weeks, and that would be a stressful time. Okay, so the state says, well, that opened the door to showing what happened in the Cass County prison. Everybody is saying, what happened in the case? Oh, did it go out for a minute? Looks like I'm back. Okay. Did you ever see him pose a threat to anyone at Westville? And the answer was he passively disregarded instructions and spit on someone. But those two things they said, open the door. Or at least I'm guessing. Remember, this argument happened outside our being able to hear it. So I'm kind of guessing on what they said, open the door to this. And remember that Richard Allen had that Rosie put in that whole paragraph about what he couldn't get in. So probably everybody's a little mad at everybody else. So we come back from lunch, and the prosecution announced that he has been looking at over the lunch that he has seen a video in the Cass County Jail where Richard Allen is screaming lots of profanity, extremely irate, pounding on the door to his cell, telling the guards he is going to effing kill them. All of that has happened in the last 3 weeks while he was in Cass County awaiting this trial. Now, how is that relevant? And I gave you what the two things were that I figure they say open the door. To me, I would say that's really not relevant. And here's why I would say that. This is a case about the murder of 2 girls. This is not a case about what Rick Allen has done in jail. So 2 girls 7 years ago. The jailhouse tantrum is irrelevant to that. If he needs to be prosecuted for that, fine. But that doesn't mean he murdered 2 girls 7 years ago. And this case needs to focus on that question. There is enough issue around that. Nothing else needs to be thrown into that mix. So if you need, to me, they're totally separate. And I think it would be unbelievably prejudicial for the jury to see a video with him doing that and yelling, I'm effing going to kill you and stuff like that. Because all it does is say, this is a bad guy. This is a dangerous guy. So a dangerous guy now was probably a dangerous guy 7 years ago. And if he would say, I might effing kill guards, and he might actually have effing killed 2 little girls. And you see that correlation, but it's not necessarily true. Just because they were actually... just because he's charged with murder and just because he gets angry and yells at the guards doesn't mean he murdered those girls. They're different. They're separate things. You could yell at guards and never have murdered anybody ever. And I'm sure many people have done that in prison. I'm sure that many people have yelled at guards. So I think it was really inappropriate and should not have come in. Now, they did a lot of this argument outside, and it was really entertaining, really, to watch. They were up in the corner, and I'm telling you, it took a really long time because first they argued it, and then the defense went out and watched the video, and then they came in and argued it some more, and then the judge watched the video, and they argued it some more, and then she came back and ruled. I mean, this was 2 hours or something, or at least an hour and a half. And you could see them when they would argue at the bench every now and again. You could just see Rosie, and he was just very adamant. I mean, he was upset. The defense was really upset. I don't think they had any idea about this videotape. I heard from someone in the courtroom, and can't confirm it, that apparently what had happened is, for some reason, Richard Allen's wife and mother had been removed from the permission to call list. So he wasn't getting any calls, couldn't get any calls from his wife or his mother. So you can understand where someone would be upset. Was this a good idea? I'll say not. But shockingly, after all of that, the judge actually sustained the defense objection. There haven't been a handful of objections from the defense that she sustained. I'm probably exaggerating, but I will tell you what, every objection, every bit of evidence, everything they request, they lose. Sometimes it seems pretty unfair. This one, I think she was dead on. I think it needed to be sustained, and she did it. So I thought that was great. That was where they wanted to kind of end their case, right? They wanted it to be on that. And that isn't really kind of how it worked out. So instead, he came back. Phone calls were monitored for other people. I mean, he just asked a couple of random questions that he asked before, and then said, okay, well, that's it. And then cross-examination, very, very wisely, Rosie said absolutely nothing. He's like, yeah, I don't have any questions. He had just won something huge, really important, and that was such a wise move. Just sit down and stop while you're ahead. Very, very wise. We had several juror questions. I thought I'd give you one. Do you know how many vans travel down Brad Weber's drive? So they're trying to figure did it have to be Brad Weber's van if he saw a van? And the answer is, yeah, pretty much. It's just, I think, 2 houses or 3, something very, very limited. So the state then wanted to admit some photographs of the defendant that were not time-stamped, not authenticated. And I think they wanted to do it for this is what he looked like closer to the time of Bridge Guy. So you can look at that and look at Bridge Guy, and he looked the same. The problem was they didn't have a time on them or a date. So they didn't really have evidence that they were actually evidence of what he would have looked like around the time that the girls were murdered. So it wasn't admitted because they really weren't able to connect it up. But there was Google search history. We didn't get to see it. So here's how it worked. They just passed it out. It was really strange. I've actually never seen this happen before. There was no witness on the stand. There had been authentication of this earlier, and the judge wanted to take under consideration the ruling. So it was just Google search history. It was maybe that thick, and I think most people would search Google a lot more than that over a period of a long time. So I don't know what exact period of time it covered. I don't know how it was authenticated. Nobody from Google has come saying, I don't know. I don't know how it was done. What I do know is we didn't get to see it. A separate set of sheet paper was passed out to each juror. So, and they looked through it. They were given time to read it and look over it. And I believe they put it in their folders, which, by the way, their gussets are like that now they have a lot of everything's being given to them in paper form. And often we don't see it in the gallery. They're watching the trial. It's just handed to the jurors. And so it'll say, look at this photograph. And we're like, I would like to. But I think we will be getting soon some intel about what these Google searches were. After court each day, the media is allowed to look at the exhibits for the day. YouTubers, we don't count. We don't count. So we can't look at the exhibits. We weren't able to see them, but I would imagine they would look through it and start telling us, okay, here's what these searches were. Could be that they ended with real bang. Maybe these were horrendous, terrible Google searches, like in the Rex Yearman case that they've entered. Those are appalling, but I don't know. Since I haven't seen them at all. It was just a strange circumstance where there was, no witness on the stand. And with that, bam, the curtain came down on the prosecution case and the defense case began. So let me thank a few people, and we will hop into the defense case and whether or not it helped them or not. Mitt Spunky, thank you for gifting Lawyer Lee memberships. I appreciate that. And does Richard Allen have a way to know about the van before the confession? There was a reference to there being 100 by Rosie, 100 places in discovery where a van was mentioned. And by the way, it wasn't, did you say a van? No, you said a van. So apparently we're going to hear from, I think the paralegal will probably tell us what was given to him in discovery. So possibly, but the prosecution thinks there were no references. So we will find out who's right. All right, Jennifer, thank you. You're listening to me sitting in the line at the courthouse. Thank y'all. I really appreciate it. And speaking of, Jen has been organizing all of this stuff for me. I am so, so grateful to the sitters. Bonnie stayed late. I mean, she was there all night. She's driven in from a long way away, is staying in town just to do this for a couple nights. If you have some time and can line sit down at the courthouse, we would be very grateful. In the description of this video, there's a link and you can sign up to line sit. It would be greatly appreciated. So thank you. And thank you, Jen. I'm glad y'all are listening. That's awesome. Pug and Spice super sticker. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll do a few more. Wow, there's a lot. Gretchen, and thank you very, very much. Gretchen, Mama, if he's innocent, it's destroyed more than an innocent man, traumatize his family. Yeah, I totally agree. That is one of the reasons why I think it's so critically important that I be here. That's why I came, because if this is the wrong guy, that is such injustice. And Libby and Abby deserve more than that. As do we, as a nation, as a society. We deserve for the right person to be in prison and for an innocent man not to be convicted. So that's why I think this case matters so much. And it's so important that it be visible, that it be open to the public, that it not be tried in secret. That's exactly what the right to a public trial is all about. Jan is ready to come over and spend the night on the pull-out couch. I don't know if it is or not. I'm not sure. Trisha, I don't sleep enough anyway. You would probably not get well rested. Trisha, I'm so glad you're a new member. Thank you. And Michael, Incredible Hulk. Well, that sounds fun. Also, put your costumes in. If you did something for Halloween, if you're dressed as something fun, let me know. All right, Casey, thank you so much. And Jay Hancock, I'm enjoying covering it. Helen, thank you for the super sticker. And let me dive back in because I don't want us to get too distracted with all that. So we are about to start on the defense case. And they started out with a witness. Did it help them? That's what we're going to ask. It was a witness we've heard a lot less about. Cheyenne Mill is her name. She talked about when she was at the trail that day. This is another person who was at the trail that day. She was at the trail at 2:50. I'm going to pop this back up so we can see it. Okay, so you see the last movement of Libby's phone is 2:32. So after that, she is at the trail with a friend. They park at the Mears Connector. She called it the Mears Connector. The Mears entrance, it had also been called. That's the exact entrance where Libby and Abby were dropped off and where they were supposed to be picked up, but they didn't show up. They, of course, had been at least abducted, if not abducted and murdered by the time her dad arrived. Libby's dad arrived to pick her up. So at 2:50 p.m., this woman, Cheyenne Mill, arrives to walk on the trail. And she parks in that exact area where the girls have been dropped off. She knows the timing or can get it pretty close because at 3:12, she got a call from her boyfriend and she was already out on the trail. So that's the same time. By this time, Derek German is already out walking the trail too and trying to find the girls. Libby's phone has stopped moving. And the prosecution says that's because she's already dead. The reason her phone isn't moving, she's no longer able to move it. So this witness, Cheyenne Mills, said she passed one man. Then she reached the bridge. So the man would have been, and she's going to have some more times like a picture that was taken at 3:49. So we know that she arrived at 2:50, that she went to the bridge, and I walked it, so I'm thinking maybe 10 to 15 minutes max to get to the bridge. So somewhere between like 3:05, but by like say 3:05, she's probably already seen the man that she said he was overweight, that they spoke to him and he didn't respond to them. That's exactly what one of the state witnesses said about the man they saw. As of 7 years later, she says, I don't know the clothes anymore. Whatever I told the police would have been accurate at the time. And she had a lot of negative things to say about how she had called the very next day and said, I was at the trails. I'll tell you what, anything you want to know. And they didn't call her for 2 weeks. And then they pretty much seemed to disregard her. She said they were really pretty rude, like they didn't want her information. She said she walked to the bridge at the first platform and saw 2 other people there. Her friend, Shelby Dix, I believe it was, could have been Pix, and then Shelby's friend, Daniel. There were 2 Shelbys because this woman, Mill, is with a Shelby, and then there's another Shelby, and she's with her boyfriend, Daniel. So then Shelby Duncan, the one that Cheyenne Mill is with, and Cheyenne walk all the way across the bridge to the other side. There's no Libby, there's no Abby, there's no abduction. And now this is later, right? This is sometime maybe 3:15, 3:30. And at no point do they see anything to give them cause to believe someone's been kidnapped. They don't see the girls there. So they do go off the bridge at the end just to use the bathroom. Libby and Abby have been ordered, and we can see from the video that she took, to go down the hill on, if you're walking to the end of the bridge, on the left side. And it was on the right side that they just stepped off to go to the bathroom. They took a photo on the bridge on the way back, and at 3:49 is when that happened. At 3:53, they took another photo. At 3:55, they took a third photo. So all of those photos happened, and you can see, let's see what happens. Those are happening around 3:57. Sarah Carbaugh is going by. out on the road outside. And Sarah Carbaugh says at 4 o'clock, she sees a stressed out group gathered at the mirror's entrance. That's exactly what this witness says too. This witness says, so she says they were the only people on the bridge, the ones she told us about, and she heard nothing unusual. She never saw anyone in the wooded area that she walked over there. There was nothing to be of concern. She gets back to the mirror's entrance, and just like Sarah Carbaugh, she finds a frantic scene. There's a lady on a moped and a man, and they're together, and they're just really frantic. They don't interact or do anything, but she just notices them. And there was no one else she saw on the trail from 2:50 until after 4 p.m. So let's take a look at the timeline. Is there anything in that makes us believe Richard Allen could not have committed the murders? So what we know is, and I'll add this in the time frame, it'll be a little easier to see them, but we can see that and we'll do an updated timeline, but I didn't have time getting home from court. I just got ready and came. So at 2:50, they were at the trail. Law enforcement thinks Libby and Abby are already gone by then. And by gone, I mean they've already died by then. And Libby's phone is no longer moving. It's underneath Abby. They don't believe it moved again after it ended up under Abby. So to me, this doesn't get Richard Allen off the hook, because if he's bridge guy and he was there at 1:30 and he's videotaped by Libby at 2:13, then the fact that she arrives at 2:50 and sees him at maybe 3:05, well, that's after the girls have been killed. So I don't really see this particular witness getting him off the hook. It may be that some of the information she has will kind of lead up to points that they want to make, but in and of herself, I don't think she clears it up for us. I don't think we know now yet whether or not they haven't proven it. That's why I don't think she gets him off the hook. All right, then let's see if there's anything else I need to tell you about that witness. That was it. She did say that she had been doxxed by Facebook vigilantes saying that she passed Richard Allen. So what? I don't understand why that means she gets doxxed, but gee. Anyway, they also put in a letter she had written to law enforcement to whom it was concerned. And the point of that, there was an objection to it, but there was a speaking objection by Rosie saying, well, it proves she wasn't even on law enforcement's radar during the investigation, and they knew she had information. He really does believe that there's been a failure to adequately investigate and to determine whether or not Libby and Abby were really murdered by Richard Allen. He thinks there are plenty of other suspects, and law enforcement just sort of left in the middle of those other suspects and didn't really investigate them. Found Richard Allen, said, there you go, close enough. We'll count that. And let's see. Okay, nope, that's it. She said specifically, I don't know if I saw Richard Allen. I don't know. I saw a guy. That's what she had to say. She did say he had something around his neck, and she assumed it was a camera. Thought that was interesting. No idea what that would be. Did you see or hear? There were 2 juror questions, and I highlighted both of these to tell you about. The first was, did you see or hear any vehicles on the road under the bridge? And she says, there's not a road. So there is a road that goes under the bridge at the far end. And I imagine that the jury was very confused by her answer. I'm sure they were, what do you mean there's no road? There is one. It's more like a path. It's a dirt road, and it's maybe not all that noticeable from where they were. So that's no doubt why she said that, but I imagine the jury was a little confused. Then the next one, if 349 was the end of the bridge and 355 was the beginning, did it take you 6 minutes to go completely across the bridge? And she said, well, no, because actually when we stopped for that second picture, we weren't all the way at the end. And so what really takes, she said, to go across the whole bridge, it would be about 10 minutes. It is a very long bridge. And she talked about how rickety it was, all these missing boards. It was crazy to walk across it. I am going to be dropping a video maybe tonight. I keep thinking I'll be able to get it done. And so I went to the Monon High Bridge. So we're going to do a walk with me, and you can walk with me and just see what it looks like. What does the bridge look like? It's crazy to get across from the new part they built to the old bridge. So I just showed you that. I'm not crazy. So, so anyway, I thought you'd enjoy seeing that because it put a lot of things in context for me, and I thought it would for you as well. All right, final witness of the day was Teresa Liebert. And here in a nutshell was her testimony. At 8:30 a.m. on the morning that Abby and Libby were abducted, she saw somebody she didn't know standing by the mailboxes. She lives on that same road that Weber lives on, but at the other end of it. And there's a gate between on the road, which you can see. And that's in the video that I dropped, where I said I was trying to go down the road and I wasn't able to get there. And I forgot. I think I got the hint, I think is what I put on the picture on the thumbnail. So Brad Weber is down this direction and she is down on the other end of this road, all one road. And although it has a name like 625 West, and it sounds like a highway, right? But it's more or less just more of a driveway. So she saw somebody standing by their mailboxes, which seemed strange, very curious. She commented to her husband, "Who's that?" And she got out of her car. She said, today, 7 years later, she can no longer describe the person. But she said that if this person had continued walking down that road past the gate, they would have ended up at the high bridge. This was another potential suspect, right? Somebody who maybe some outsider, some person who didn't belong there, maybe didn't live around there, who might have abducted Libby and Abby. And so that was the purpose of putting that in. All right, so we have completed our day, and now it's time to answer some of your questions. Look in the super chats, and give me just a minute before you start dumping your questions in, because let me read through here, and then I'll go back and answer a few questions. Put question marks at the beginning. If you would, it'll be way easier for me to see. Tell you what, I'll jump over there in the live, and if I do this, I won't lose you. So you can go ahead and put them in now. Okay, so let's see. Magali. Yeah, I know that was so hard, saying how difficult this must be for me. It was really amazing to see those family ties. Those are some fine women. I will tell you what, his wife and his mother, dang. So I was really impressed. And the mercy of his wife, it was amazing. And the mother just, I love you no matter what. That's who I am. I love you. I was very moved. And thank you. I really appreciate that. My husband passed away in May, so that's what she's referring to. So does the timeline, Jan asked me, show when the Odinist guards went on duty? I don't know about the Odinist guards, so definitely it's not on there. It has not been presented in evidence, most likely because the entire Odinism theme was ruled out by Judge Gull. So nope, we have nothing on that. The Cemetery Wanderer is a new member. Wonderful. That's fantastic. MCM 11. Did Richard Allen start confessing before or after he had access to discovery? I think the answer is after. There, I want to go back to it. I thought there was one in March, but I think all of it happened after he had, well, I believe his first confession came in March, but the only confession that had some details around it came after he had access to discovery. The others were, as Rosie pointed out, more generic. Just, I killed them, not I killed them in such and such a way, in such and such a place. And there was there were no details to it. So it was very just, I did it. I did it was most often what he said. Lisa says, you guys are super saints. She was only in the courtroom from 3 to 5 and wiped out. It is tiring. It is really tiring. You're trying to listen frantically and pay close attention because I don't want to miss stuff and say something wrong and everybody gets confused. But I've really enjoyed it. This is a fascinating case. C.A. Bever Forden, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And Spence, I appreciate that as well. The Inside Edition thing, I think that's either going to be postponed. We may not even be doing it. I have to say I'm a little bit relieved. I was like wondering, how am I going to do that tomorrow? So anyway, I don't know. We may or may not be doing that. Nana of 7, thank you for gifting 10 lawyerly memberships. I appreciate that very much. And yes, KCL member for 2 months. It was every bit that wild. It was crazy day, especially that video, which we never saw, of the Cass County altercation, whatever it was, a tantrum, fit, whatever happened with Richard Allen. We didn't get to see it, but I guarantee you it will come out. It will come out at some point. And thank you, Matthew Pitzinger. I appreciate that. He gives lots of lawyerly memberships. I'm very grateful, Matthew. And Miss Figgy is a new member. Wonderful. Maya, oh, thank you so much, is really impressed with the coverage. And oh, I'm so glad. Make you a better attorney. Well, I'm especially honored that you watch. If you're an attorney, that's a high, high honor. All right. Isn't there a filing about the judge withholding information from the public? Do we know a status on that? Gretchen Mama asked me, you might be talking about my friend Andrea's filing where she asked for example, YouTubers and members of the public to be allowed to see those exhibits. The ones I told you, I can't tell you what the Google searches were about because I didn't get to see it. They handed it to the jury and that was it. But the press should have been able to see it. The mainstream media is allowed to go up and see those exhibits at the end of the day. So those sorts of things were covered in her motion. Now, the judge denied it and said no, but I think she is going to appeal that. So we will look forward to that. Laura, a new member, wonderful. And Megan asking me, everyone deserves love like Richard Allen has from his family, regardless of the verdict. I agree with that. The world would be a better place. Yes, right? I mean, dang, you just listen to that and I'm just like, wow, I loved that. Lisa is a new member. That's awesome. Lisa Shelton. And Cheryl, I appreciate it. Kim, super sticker. Thank you. And Diane Matters. Mama Pink says, bets are in for the page count. All right. Are you ready? Do you have your bets in? I'm giving you another. Here's your chance. Put it in the chat. What do you think the number was? Are you ready? It was, let's see. All right. 42 pages. All right, there you go. And that was some intense stuff because when they're doing the conversations, I really want to be able to bring you like the whole back and forth. I want to be able to tell you, he said, she said, and go back and forth. I think, those words, they really matter. Maybe it's me being a lawyer, but words. So I really wanted to get that down for you. So I'm scribbling frantically. That's why I can't always even read what I wrote. But I tried to get every word I got as close as I could, for sure. Food fund. Thank you, friend of St. Frank. I appreciate that. I still have not had supper tonight, so I will use your $5 for the food fund. Thank you. And Gustavo Vera, thank you for that. And Matthew Pitzinger, another 20 lawyerly memberships. Thank you so much. And so I really appreciate that very much. And, we'll just go ahead and call it. We will do the members live right after the regular live stream that will be as close to 7 o'clock on Saturday as I can get it. Hopefully it will be at 7. So when that finishes up, then we'll go into the members only event that will follow that. And that'll be a lot of fun. So all of you turn on your ability to receive a gift and YouTube will magically confer these gifts on people unknown. We have no control over it, but somehow YouTube magically does it. So Mama Pinks will put in the chat how exactly you do that. And while I'm at it, let me say a huge thank you to Marlon and to Mama Pinks who moderate for us and keep me sane when I'm like, I'm quitting YouTube. That's no, you're not quitting YouTube. So I'm very, very appreciative of them. All right, let's see how I am doing. Hopefully I didn't go too far back. Oh, here we go. Amy has a question. She's any details about the FBI being asked to leave the case and any chance the local law enforcement can be held accountable for their many mistakes. And there's not any detail about the FBI leaving the case. There have been a couple of attempts by Brad Rosie to get questions in that asked about and maybe by Baldwin as well, that asked about the turf war between the FBI and the Indiana State Police. We know they were in there and suddenly they were not in there. And exactly when that happened and why, that we don't know. So we don't have a lot of detail. And I don't think we're going to get a lot. I think it's going to be all interagency stuff and they're not going to reveal to us exactly what happened. But that's my best guess. And I'm sorry we won't get more, but I don't think local law enforcement will be held accountable for mistakes. I think, honestly, I do believe they probably did the best that they could, but it just didn't work. And there were places where they let the ball drop, like this witness who was there in the park, who may well have seen the killer or may have seen Richard Allen. And she didn't ever get a chance really to present her side to them. They interviewed her apparently rather cursorily, and then they didn't follow up. And there were other instances of that Richard Allen says are affecting his ability to have a case. But I don't think it's a situation where there would be some kind of accountability. I think they were doing their best, and there were things that they just didn't investigate. All right. April asking me about the Innocence Project, estimating that 2 to 5% of incarcerated persons are innocent, and that would be 40,000 people. How can we do better? So, and as far as estimates, it's very hard to know how many people. An estimate is just that. There's no data that could ever confirm that. The Innocence Project has made efforts to take DNA testing and to use that to prove that people are innocent. One of the things they're looking at now is the Scott Peterson case, and that will be certainly sensational if what they find is that there was DNA of someone else. At this point, though, that case is nowhere near being resolved. They're just opening it up for some testing. But, I think it's a serious problem. I mean, there's a saying that it's better for one guilty man to go. No, strike that. It's better for 100 guilty men to go free than for one innocent man to suffer. And I don't know that that's a hard thing to say. That is a very hard thing to say. But it is critically important that we only convict people who are actually guilty. One of the most important ways that we ensure that happens is with sunshine, is with people being allowed in the courtroom to watch it. That's why hidden kangaroo courts where people are convicted behind closed doors with no evidence or unknown evidence, and the public is just told, yeah, they were guilty. That's unacceptable. And it's unacceptable under our constitutional framework. You have the right as a citizen to a public trial. And that's one of the things that I've been concerned is not happening with Richard Allen. There's been a lot of question around whether he's guilty, a lot of question around whether he's being treated fairly. And then on top of that, it's not a public trial. That's a recipe for disaster. And I'm not saying it's not a public trial in the 100% of the term, but it's been made very difficult to cover. Everything about it has made it more difficult for everyone involved to get the real inside information about what's happening even during the trial. And that was why I thought this is important and this really matters. Kim, thank you for your super sticker. And Diane Matters. If I'm repeating, I'm really sorry. I'm seeing this mixed in with the questions. How many? Yep, I've given my page count. So I'll have to find out who won the pot or how it worked today. Did Richard Allen take a lie detector test? I doubt it, and I would strongly advise him against it. It does you absolutely no good to take a lie detector test. If you pass, law enforcement just says, oh, yeah, well, that's just a lie detector test. That's not even admissible. And if you fail, law enforcement says, well, you're guilty, clearly guilty. You failed the lie detector test. So that is a no-win proposition. All right, Beth is asking me, the girls' movement in water will inhibit freedom of movement. The first of the girls could have been killed here. Lack of blood, one or more murders. What do you think? So I'm thinking if somebody got killed in the creek, I just can't see Richard Allen struggling up the hill while carrying the dead girl who should be bleeding all the way up. And then meanwhile, managing to hold a gun on the other one so that they get up to the clearing and he can kill the other one. I can't really picture all of that happening. But it is one of the most confusing scenes I've ever you can't even imagine it. It's just bizarre. Nothing about it makes sense. All right, Lila, can the defense put the wife on the stand to get that phone recording in? Yes, the defense could, but does the defense want to? They've got the phone recordings they want in, I think. I don't think there's anything that they want in. I don't think that either side will call Kathy Allen. That is a really dicey proposition. The defense puts her on, no telling what the prosecution might ask, so they're going to be nervous about that. And for the prosecution to put her on, that is just asking for trouble. If she's crying and talking about her husband and, she's obviously loves him, very emotional, just, I think nobody wants to touch that with a 10-foot pole. That would be my guess. It's too risky to put her up on the stand. A few days ago, the prosecution mentioned emails. Did the judge ever rule on that? I don't remember that. You might be meaning the Google searches because I think that it came in through an email. It was the Google searches under a particular email. And so I'm thinking that I mentioned email and that, Kelly, that's what you're thinking about. And today, those came in. That was the packet of papers passed out to the jury last thing before the prosecution rested. There was no discussion of it. We don't know what was on it. Hopefully the media, the mainstream media, will report on that and we'll learn over the evening. I'm curious myself. GWL wants to know what doesn't add up so far for you, Lee. All of it. All of it. I do not understand I don't understand the timing. I don't understand why Libby's phone stops moving at a different time from when she gets the text messages. I don't understand the video. There's nothing about this that is making sense to me. I am really wondering, and I don't feel like I have a lot more answers having been here. I have a lot more questions, maybe more informed questions. All right, let's see. Is the prosecution trying to change the timeline? They didn't specifically put out a timeline before, so I don't know that they are. I can't say that they are because I can't say that they had a timeline they had expressed before. So I guess I can't answer that. Leslie wants to know, can we get a van specific timeline since that seems to be a popular aspect now? You're right that seems really popular, and not just popular, important, critically important. I'll include that on the timeline. It's really only one entry. He says he went by at this period of time. So I'll add that in. One other entry might be if the defense manages to prove that really he wasn't there at that time, he was there at some later time, I would need to add that in too. So I think we'll add it in. Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that message. Cecilia, whatever. Oh, that's the one that I think it was not an email that came in. It was Google searches done under that email. So I guess he had more than one email, and this was an email that I guess he used for searches of a sexual nature. That's what the prosecution called it, of a sexual nature. All right. So Sarah asking if you looked at the court docket to see when prosecutors provided discovery. We're going to get testimony on that. We're going to get actual testimony because this is not when the prosecutors provided the discovery, but when the defense lawyers sent it to their client, and they sent it at I think he said 2 weeks before Richard Allen got it. So the time that we're going to be most interested in is when did Richard Allen actually receive that discovery? That's what we are going to be looking at. And we've had some testimony about that already. That was, I think, April 5th is when he started putting what might have been discovery down his toilet and it came to overflowing. So we've heard a little bit about that. All right, let's see. A few more people. Volunteer, thank you. And Colleen is a new member. Welcome. Wendy, thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate that a lot. And Alicia as well. Thank you so much. And Liz Lou, thank you all so much. I really do appreciate all of that. All right. Short of all the dramatics around the trial, Anna asked me, would you believe any one of his confessions? So I would, yes, sort of. I would. Let me change that up, because in the dramatics, I'm including all of the stuff that happened to his mental health, and the stuffing papers down, the banging his head against the wall until he was very injured, just all the stuff that he did that suggested this really severe mental decline, including the records being kept by the prison psychologist that documented this decline. And it was clearly different behavior. And the prosecution wants to say it's because he got the discovery and realized, now he was going to be nailed for a crime. He says, no, it wasn't related to that. It was the solitary confinement for months on end that had just driven him to this point. So if you were to pull that out and simply someone came up to you and said, I did it. Yep, I did it. I wanted you to know I did it, and I'd like to apologize to the families. I would certainly believe that, of course. But what gets added in here is this layer of facts that the defense is building and that the prosecution itself has offered much evidence around as to where he was mentally. The defense is saying the mental status was so bad that we cannot trust anything he said. And the prosecution is saying, cut out everything you want, but we're left with the van. We're left with this fact he shouldn't have known. So there you have it. That is what we will be hearing more about in the next few days. It has become one of the most central issues, as y'all just mentioned before. All right. Seems they have no tangible evidence, says JQ, besides the possible confessions. They also have the bullet. The prosecution says that the unspent cartridge that was found between the feet of Libby and Abby had been cycled through Richard Allen's gun 3 times. And I guess was put in again each time, came out, put in, came out, put in, did that 3 times. And they said that's evidence that connects Richard Allen to the scene of the crime. But that's it. That's it. There's no DNA. There's no hair. There's nothing else that connects Richard Allen to the scene of the crime or anyone else other than Libby and Abby. There was some vague stuff about a man or about 2 women, unknown female 1 and unknown female 3, with number 2 just missing. And who knows who that was? So I think that there's not a lot of evidence. I think these confessions are super important, and they turn out to be a lot more nuanced than I certainly expected them to be. Up to 26 or 28 pages. Marlon, what do you take me for? An amateur note taker? All right. Shrunken Jumper. Do you think, Richard? I think that didn't get finished. So it's probably down here further. All right. Looking for the next question. I'll do just a couple more. We've gone plenty long. Maya, is it true that the van was not in discovery? And if so, why wouldn't it have been if it was this important? So it was only important after Richard Allen said there was something about a van that interrupted him, startled him. That caused him to change his mind. He was going to R the 2 girls. Here's the van, gets startled, scared. Instead, he decides he has to kill them. And he changes his mind, no longer going to be any kind of SV. Now he's just going to murder them. And that's what he says he did. He said he was startled by the van. That made the van really important. So up until then, there was really no reason for anybody to be looking specifically at, was a van traveling down this road? They, of course, were looking at were vehicles traveling down because they wanted to know, did somebody take Libby or Abby? But nobody was looking at the van specifically. So the guard who testified had his face tattoo covered. I don't remember that. That's interesting. I guess I possibly didn't look. We had a bunch of guards yesterday afternoon, just a slew of guards. So I assume you mean like an Odinist. Gosh, I wish I'd looked for an Odinist tattoo. That would have been very interesting. I didn't really look for that. Do I think I'm not going to say about guilt or innocence yet, Shrunken Jumper. My goal right now is to just get the facts, find out what are they. I have a lot of questions, so I am nowhere near figuring out what I think happened. Not even remotely close. I really would like to know a lot more. All right, so let me see if there are a couple more people that here it is. Thank you, Real V Smith. I appreciate that very much. All right, one more question, maybe 2, something like that. I'm looking for those question marks. So Lulu Bell Jingles asked me, you described the demeanor of his wife. What about the girl's family? So for today, I was sitting on the other side from where the families sit. I was sitting near where Richard Allen's wife sits. So that's the view I had. They sit kind of that way. And as I said, this, I think, would have been less emotional for them, although I was very curious what they thought about it, how they reacted to it, but I couldn't see, and I thought it'd be inappropriate to stare. So, but they really reacted particularly to the scene, and that was extremely hard to watch because it was a very difficult scene, and to see those little girls, like, oh my gosh, it was very painful to watch. So unfortunately today I can't give you any feedback on that. I just didn't get a chance to see. All right. Please get the rest I need. Yes. Overdoing a member live. I know I really want to do a member live though. I really do. So I know it is, I am getting really tired. So I am going to have to balance that, but that'll be our plan anyway. So, all right. Well, I will see you all tomorrow night as close to 7 as I can get. And tonight that was 8. So maybe it'll be 8, but I'll be going as soon as I can after the day tomorrow. And I will see you then.